All this began with a photograph of her. The publishers of her book had to cut her out of a photograph with Juanel, her partner, just so she could be featured standing alone. This was in 1928. Absorbed in her work, a box of old family photos, lost in the archives, coming across anecdotes in the ripples of history. In this search for her, I've decided to make this film. Dolores Iturbe Arizcuren devoted her life to the visibility of women during a time where there was very little. Self-taught, she became a pioneer in the anarcha-feminist movement in Barcelona. A militant for the National Confederation of Labor, she worked as an editor for Tierra Libertad. A contributing writer for Tiempos Nuevos, Mujeres Libres, y Solidaridad Obrera. She wrote about the social and political struggles during the early years of the Republic, the Spanish Civil War, and later while living in exile. On the surface, Dolores shied away from speaking of herself. When interviewed, she would turn the focus to the stories of other women, leaving traces of their lives. She evaded the personal by saying, there is no point in talking about just one woman, as if her sense of self existed within a deep awareness of others. In the summer of 1938, while life was tilting on its side, Dolores met anarchist Emma Goldman. Her and her partner Juanel, a prominent anarchist well known around the community, received Emma Goldman in one of her 3 visits to Spain. While visiting the 10th Army Corps, Dolores and Emma Goldman are invited to take a photograph together. She stands in the center, surrounded by 7 compañeros, Dolores on her right side, Juanel amongst the others. Their arms are close, without touching. Neither smiles. Emma Goldman was twice the age of Dolores. She had studied the works of Emma, pillars of the anarchist movement. Dolores remembers her as having a vibrant energy, her sad smile, her piercing eyes. They observed each other with empathy and quiet admiration. Emma Goldman had come to Barcelona in solidarity, wanting to see the front with her own eyes. The CNT were fighting fascism, not as a means to re-establish a democratic government, but in defense of the revolution, with determination to build a new life. Emma saw her Spanish comrades demonstrating that anarchism is the most constructive social philosophy worth living, fighting, and if need be, dying for. The foundations of civilization were tottering. She knew that people were losing faith in the existing institutions. Salvation was being sought in fascism. The world was at a loss for a way out. Later that day, they were both in the garden, while Juanel was in the field. Dolores tells Emma that working the garden has been the most useful thing he has done during the war. They gave each other a look and shared a good laugh. Emma Goldman was a force of nature within the anarchist movement. She strongly believed in the philosophy of a new social order, emancipation from the state, from individualism, a true emancipation of women. Dolores thought anarchists should avoid the spectacle of the public eye, and instead devote their energy to transform a society in need of rupture. She found that the idle ideals of the liberal elite towards the revolution disregarded the realities of the working class woman. While on her visit, Emma is photographed with Lucia Sanchez Cernil and Christine Conrabe, founders of the publication Mujeres Libres. Sanchez Cernil is in a dark tailor-made suit, a stiff white-collar blouse, a handkerchief in her breast pocket, and hair comme des garçons. She believed that the Spanish woman uneducated, had little concerns about social or political issues, an outcome from the submissive role women have had throughout history, limiting women's place in society to brothels or marriage. This image of the Spanish woman was precisely what Dolores was fighting against. During this time, the alternative to the conventional family was free love and anarchist thought, seeking freedom from state regulation and interference. Dolores firmly believed that love should be shared with complete freedom and mutual respect. The woman would benefit from this by being able to devote more time towards themselves rather than solely on the burdens of domestic work. In practice, free love would allow each person to define their own autonomy. On the other hand, Sanchez Cernil had made the suggestions that marriage equated to prostitution, if women lacked their own salary and a certain degree of moral equality. With different perspectives regarding the social struggle, Cernil and Dolores lived different realities. One, a working-class reality, and the other, one of intellectual privilege. Many working-class women in the post-war period, like Dolores, who worked in the retroguardia, were not prepared to be relegated to their homes when the war ended, which was often without choice. This inequality was part of why Dolores was critical of the liberal elite. She believed that libertarian communism was the key to women's emancipation and the end of class exploitation. She advocated for the education of women and took part in la Casa de la Mujer Trabajadora, a center where women could learn freely while acquiring other skills. A move towards opportunity and reproductive rights. She firmly believed that abortion was a privilege for wealthy women with access to safe conditions, while the working class had to deal with unsafe practices and the politics of motherhood that identified family and maternity with the good of the nation. She argued that under libertarian communism, abortion would be legalized. In 1936, the government of the Republic finally enacted the law regulating abortion, with the support of Federica Montseny, who was the Minister of Health at the time. A short-lived, yet important step forward. Dolores later saying that the most beneficial and outstanding conquest made by humanity in modern times has been the emancipation of women. When Dolores was young, and a few months after moving to Barcelona, she and her mother were living and working in the house of Don Roque Ponseti. Ponseti was a widowed tradesman who had an older daughter named Lola, who suffered from asthma. He had invented a system to illuminate the facade of buildings, bringing him much success and recognition amongst the elite. On occasion, Mr. Ponseti would take young Dolores on visits to the Palacio de Bellas Artes and to the cinema. She remembers going by carriage and that he was always dressed in his city suit, with gloves and a cane, while Miss Lola would take her to visit her relatives in their lavish houses. She never stopped being surprised by how much they ate. While living and working with the Ponsetis, Dolores became acquainted with the customs of the bourgeoisie. However, always from the outside, the distance she felt meant their privileges were not hers. Amongst the other children, Dolores was an outsider and looked on with suspicion. Those with cruel intentions would ask her about her absent father. These experiences marked an important turning point for Dolores, shaping her thoughts on social and political issues such as women's place in the home and class privilege. Years later, as an adolescent, she would find and embrace anarchism, community, solidarity, something that had an impact for the rest of her life. One hot summer day, young Dolores remembers looking out her window to the fountain in St. Augustine Square. She saw a man walk towards the fountain for a drink of water. She heard a shot. Dolores saw the man fall to the ground. She remembered the howling of the ambulance and the large pool of blood, and asked herself why, the lifeless man on the pavement. Dolores felt paralyzed and disoriented. Exile is a strange place to be. It is the uncertainty and impossibility of a place. The world was plunged into a state of disquietude. For a long time, Dolores would leave her bags still packed, hoping for the possibility to return. An uneasy longing. Disillusioned by what was happening, Franco's troops conquered Catalonia. Tarragona fell first, Barcelona second, Girona last. It was time to go. Overwhelmed by loss and uncertainty, time began to unravel. Dolores crossed the Pyrenees by land with her children, the same as years before. A repetition of events, a shiver through her body. In 1926, she fled to France with her 2 young children, meeting Juanel on the other side. In 1939, she would go into exile for the second time, once again, crossing into France with her 2 children to meet Juanel on the other side. The hardships of leaving were overcome by those they met along the way, later becoming companions and allies. The first time, exile was 4 years. This time, it'll be 40. A wave, a tremor, the disappointment, the sadness, the anger. She tried to console herself with the fact she had lived this once before. Dolores remembers the 1930s like a time of paradox, being part of a social revolution while there was a war around the corner. Her relationship with Juanel, and anarchist men, who, however radical they may be, behaved like vulgar husbands in their homes, demanding food, shelter, clean clothes, in addition to the children being taken care of. Dolores had come to recognize the gender inequality so prevalent in the anarchist movement. In her experience, free love, especially within patriarchal societies, burdened women with increased responsibilities. However, this was proving to replicate itself, not only within the anarchist circles, but within her life as well. Largely because her actions were determined by Juanel's political organizing. Constant sacrifice to attempt to harmonize family life, social struggle, and economic difficulties were proving to be an entrenching contradiction for Dolores. When Juanel was in jail, Dolores received a drawing with a brief message: "To my Lola, with love and affection." It would be another 6 years before Juanel was released from jail and they could meet again. Although Dolores was not in prison, Juanel's departure left her in charge of the household while taking care of her ill and aging mother, alone. Living this reality, but being a woman of the retroguardia, she claimed space to make visible the struggle of women, breaking away from the oppressive systems that existed within and outside anarchist circles. While living in exile and asked about those years, Dolores would remember the red and black flags, the parades, the striped cars with the initials of the CNT5, and would reply by saying, strangers would greet each other on the streets like comrades. The outcome of the war and the resistance that came of it laid the foundations for new forms of political and social life. Self-governed, autonomous workers, farmers, and industrial communities for people to have a say in their lives, proposing a brighter future. Dolores viewed the movements of her time as a compass for the marginalized and the oppressed. The life work of Dolores Iturbe advocated for progress, education, reproductive rights, and the visibility and equality of women in a free and inclusive society. She wrote about the heroism of militants, of the women who left their lives in the trenches, defending Barcelona from fascism. Leaving this chapter open, Dolores believed in not simply choosing one social compromise over another, but instead called for a renewal of society as a whole. A breakaway from the lies concealed by the language of politics. She was at war with her own lot. Her hope for a brighter future, despite the losses, remained triumphant. She took the role of inscribing women's narratives into history, her own militancy, women of their time. Could she have afforded to write about her own life? Openly? Unambiguously? If she had, would she have written with rage? Or did she find solace in the space between the margins? The intimate nostalgia of those years became fused with her experience in exile. As if the past were thinking of her.